The president's surprise withdrawal reshaping the race. One of my next guests says it now puts the spotlight on Trump's age. What a difference a weekend makes. Joining me now for more is former New Hampshire Senator and Governor Judd Gregg, along with former Defense Secretary, former CIA Director, and former Clinton Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. Welcome to both of you. Senator, I'll just start with you. Do you think this shines a light on Trump's age, or does he seem to be younger than, still by comparison to Biden?
Oh, he definitely seems younger, but there's no question the age issue will be played, I would presume, fairly aggressively by Vice President Harris. But there are bigger issues here, very much bigger issues. I think the biggest problem that Trump is going to have and Vance is going to have is that this isn't about their base. They can't continue their name calling. They can't continue the vitriol and the recriminations. Because this election is about independents and swing states. And independents are historically women, quite honestly, educated women. And they're not attracted to that style of presentation that Trump has. And so if he's going to broaden his capacity to do well in these swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, New Hampshire, North Carolina, he's going to have to get away. He's going to have to change his style a little bit. I thought he would. Personally, I thought he'd be a little more gracious towards President Biden, but he wasn't. He called him Crooked Joe, and he said he was unfit to be president. That was foolish, and it doesn't fly with independents. Doesn't fly with a lot of people. Doesn't fly with me as a Republican. But as a practical matter, that's where this fight is going to be set. It's going to be set with the independent votes in those swing states, and I think Vice President Harris is going to have a pretty good chance of picking up a lot of those folks.
Do you want to build on that, Secretary Panetta? And what would you say about the way that this has been handled so far? Maybe it's the right move for President Biden to lie low, or will it just invite questions about now whether he should finish out the term, for instance?
Well, I don't think there's any question that Joe Biden made the right decision with regards to stepping down. It was pretty clear that if he had stayed in the race, that it was very likely that he would not only lose in November, but probably impact on both the House and Senate races. That dynamic has now changed. Look, we've had an unprecedented year of events, beginning with the debate and then the assassination attempt, and now Joe Biden stepping down. And I suspect we're going to be on a roller coaster between now and November. It's a little difficult to tell how this will play out. But I think Judd Gray is right that right now it makes it a little tougher for the Republicans who were targeting Joe Biden as the opponent in November. They've now got to switch gears, and my sense is they're having a little more of a difficult time trying to adjust to that. So I think it'll be a very close race, as it always looked from the very beginning. And I think the Democrats, by virtue of what Joe Biden did, have put themselves in a stronger position for November.
What do you make of former President Obama's move here to not endorse the vice president yet, and potentially to invite some kind of primary or small contest amongst the other candidates?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into that. I think that a lot of people are kind of looking at the lay of the land and trying to decide what the best place is. But I think in the end, I can't imagine that former President Obama is not going to support Kamala Harris for president. I think there'll be some that will want to have a little more open process at the convention. I think that's probably not a bad idea to at least have some competition there, and to have Kamala Harris earn the right to be the presidential candidate for the Democrats. So I think there'll be some that'll kind of sit back and see how events play out through the convention. But I think anybody who's a betting person, I think the reality is that Harris is going to be the pick. And I think the real question will be who her vice president will be. If she picks somebody from Pennsylvania, the governor from Pennsylvania, the governor from Kentucky, and really balances the ticket, I think she'll be in a much stronger position. So that, I think, is what most of the party is going to be looking at how that ticket is better balanced for November.
And Senator, that now has some people questioning whether the Vance pick was. You do wonder if Biden had dropped out before the vice presidential selection, if Trump might have gone a different way now.
Well, I don't think so. I think he very much sees Vance as the future of his populist movement, and Vance is. But it is a narrowing movement when you're running in a general election. There's no question about that. And it's an honor to be on with Chairman, Secretary, Director Panetta, who has been an exceptional public servant in this country. And he's absolutely right. I think the nominating process is over. I suspect that President Obama is holding his fire so that it doesn't look like it's a fait accompli, and it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable about the way the choice is made. But the vice presidential choice is key. And if she chooses Shapiro from Pennsylvania or Cooper from North Carolina, two states which are swing states and critical states. In fact, I don't think a Democrat can get elected president if they don't carry Pennsylvania. That'll be a very strong ticket. This race has a lot still to see, and as with anything else, it moves very quickly, and a day can be a big day, and a lot of things can happen in a day. But this is going to be a very strong race from Vice President Harris, and we're going to see President Trump also run a very strong race, and it's going to be very interesting to follow, to say the least.